Welcome to the first annual Flyover Conservatives Labor Day special.
Yay!
We kind of began this theme back in July. We have special days, special holidays. Let's set aside the regular news cycle and talk about something that transcends that year, that moment, something that's historical. And there's really only one person that we could have that could cover things all the way from the Garden of Eden till now. We're talking about labor. We're talking about work. One of the first things that God told Adam was get to work, put him in a garden for him to work it. And we all work, whether you want to or not. You're doing your yard, you're married, you got a list of things to get after. And we have this day set aside called Labor Day. But I'd venture to say the majority of Americans don't know what it's rooted in, how it began, what it's really about, other than, maybe some barbecue and cornhole. But we're going to diffuse all of that today. We've got the author of a book called The Real History from Plato to the Present, but we're going to go back before Plato a little bit today. He's historian, he's author, Bill Federer.
Yay! Welcome, Bill.
Well, David, Stacy, great to be with you.
Thanks for coming back. I tell you, our 4th of July special, that was amazing. We got such great feedback, and we're really excited about the special today as well.
Well, it's a fascinating history, and there's sort of two things. One is labor itself, and the other is the Labor Day and how it has interesting roots with a lot of rabbit trails, and I'm happy to take you through it.
Well, we're excited. We're going to put a link down below. If you're looking here, you can go down there and find the link to the 4th of July special. Again, it's not specific to that year. It was some great rabbit trails we kind of got into of the intent of the founding fathers. We got some of these guys.
I know we were able to pull out your little bobbleheads today, David. He was very excited.
I'm very proud of my bobblehead collection. Some people have little spoons or maybe I don't know, money that they collect. I got bobbleheads.
That's right.
And so, but we brought out the collection, dusted them off. We're really excited to talk about this. We love learning. We really do. I've always grown up with this kind of a Lee Greenwood soundtrack in the back of my head, sort of proud of our American heritage, aware of our flaws, but celebrate the intent of the things that our country set in motion. And there's sort of a pride of excellence and doing your best. And I think we all feel best when we're working and we're in a field and we're doing our best in some of these things. So I've always kind of had that there. But this is a holiday that I really didn't know a lot about, to be honest with you. We started researching this before the show, and I'm like, oh, this has connections to stuff that I had no idea. You have broken down, I think, the constitution of all 13 original colonies. You've studied pretty much every form of government throughout the history of man, and I just kind of like to, but by the time we're done, I want people to understand the intent of work and compensation, the importance of it for us, the importance of it to God, going back to Adam till now. If you can break that down in the next 50 minutes, this is going to be an incredible Labor Day special. No pressure.
Well, as far as Labor Days, you go back to the Roman times where you had mostly the upper class and then slaves. And the slaves had to work every single day. And so they would get a holiday, whether it's a new moon or whatever, and it would be a day off. And so that's why days off were a big deal. And that's why a lot of the Roman pagan holidays, when they Christianized the Roman Empire, they just changed the name of the holiday to a Christian holiday, right? Because these were days that the common people really wanted off, and it was easier just to change the purpose of the day off rather than readjust the whole calendar.
Right.
But as far as the founding of America goes, most of the founders were self-employed. They were entrepreneurs, they were farmers, and they had trades that were surrounding agriculture. And so you had the farmer, the milliner, who would take the grain and ground it into flour. You had a cooper, which is a barrel maker. You had a wheelwright, which is somebody who made wheels for wagons. You had a blacksmith. A chandler was somebody that made candles. A cobbler was a shoemaker. And then, of course, tailor, upholsterer, and the baker and the butcher, and apothecary, printer, gunsmith. But they were all independent, self-employed with their own little businesses. And then you have the Industrial Revolution. What's that? So England burned coal. They burned trees, but they pretty well chopped most of those down. And then they realized they could burn coal, the black rock down under the ground. And Ireland, they use the like a peat moss type of swampy black mud, but they would dry it out, and for some reason it would burn. But it was sort of like a pre-coal type of stuff. But the British used coal, and they would dig mines, and the mines would inevitably fill up with water, rainwater, seepage water. And so a lot of people were figuring out how to get the water out of the mine. And somebody named James Watt, W-A-T-T, developed a pump, but this was a steam pump. And so it had the different cylinders, and the hot expanded, coal contracted, and he figured out how to do this repeatedly. And you could have it turn a shaft and a gear, and it went from just pumping water out of a mine to having a steam run factory and a steam engine and steamboats and steam railroads. And it started this steam, what's called the Industrial Revolution, where you could have factories that could mass produce items inexpensively. And the most important thing they made was cloth. And they would buy cotton from the colonies and the southern states in America and use that cotton in their textile factories. So it was the fastest rise in the standard of living in world history.
Wow.
And so instead of ladies having to spend days at a spindle making thread so they can weave a sweater, you can buy a whole bolt of cloth pretty cheap. And then you had, glass items and metal items. And so England was the leader in this industrialized era, and America was playing catch up. And so the northern states began to build factories, but they were less efficient. And so they put a tax on goods imported from Europe. And this made those more expensive. So prior to Woodrow Wilson, there was no income tax. There was a temporary income tax with Lincoln during the Civil War, but it was repealed. But Woodrow Wilson pushed in the first income tax, a top 1% tax on the top 1% richest people. But so prior to that, how did the federal government get its money? Through tariff taxes, predominantly on imports to block them. And the problem is that the tariffs that helped the South hurt the North. So the South had few factories. It stayed agricultural. And so if you put tariffs on it, that means they have to buy stuff from Europe more expensive because of these tariffs, or buy stuff from the northern factories, which were more expensive. Either way, prior to the Civil War, at one point, 90% of the federal government was financed by the South collecting tariffs. And so when the South had an economic downturn, they threatened to stop collecting the tariffs. And that's when the federal troops were sent to Fort Sumter to force them to continue to collect the tariffs. And eventually the Civil War started. And it wasn't
pretty complicated bag of nuts, that Civil War, wasn't it?
No kidding.
Yeah, so it wasn't until 1863 that Lincoln changed the purpose of the Civil War to ending slavery. And it was a brilliant stroke because the Europeans, especially England, had William Wilberforce, and they fought to get rid of slavery. And so when he changed the focus of the war to ending slavery, the Europeans basically said, hands off the Confederacy, and it undermined support for the southern states. So it was a brilliant stroke. Anyway, so we're talking Labor Day history.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And so you had these cloth manufacturers, dishes, farm tools. Women were freed from hand weaving and hand washing clothes. And then you had bridges and skyscrapers and a building revolution. And then you had steamboats that went up the rivers with Robert Fulton. And then you had steam engines with railroads. And then you had people getting mobile so they could quickly go across the country. And items that used to be expensive, like sewing machines, could be purchased relatively inefficiently. And so this is all great. And then you had wealthy industrialists that were running these factories that got very wealthy. But still, they were patriotic. Then something happens, a lot of immigrants. you had wars in Europe, and these immigrants coming to America, and anybody could hire them. There were no unions, and they were happy to get a job where they could learn the language, learn a skill, and the next generation, they would own the factories and they would own the businesses and own the shops. And so it was an upward mobility. So every immigrant was a net plus. It was cheap labor, and they would be able to learn the skill and then start their own business and move up the ladder. And they would be thrilled to be in America, where they had these opportunities, because Europe still was this class society of the centuries of wealthy people that owned all the capital, and then the common people that had no upward mobility. And so they were thrilled to be in America, and they were patriotic, and they had a work ethic. And another rabbit trail, the work ethic, considered it a moral failure to receive a handout. And so many of them would refuse handouts. Now later, Lyndon Johnson, 1965, realized that immigrants from other countries that were poor didn't have that, what was called the Protestant work ethic. And they were happy to take the handout. And once they took it, they got used to it, and you could count on their vote for them to vote to continue it. So that's a whole nother attitude. But these initial immigrants came to America.
Hey, Bill, can I ask you a question while we're on this spot right here at that Industrial Revolution change? I learned this the other day. I was just reading. Do you know, if I could stump the great Bill Federer?
Oh my gosh.
This would be just, I mean, I would probably make a plaque for myself. Yes, absolutely. Do you know what a knocker-upper is?
I don't want to take a shot at it and get it wrong, so I'll let you explain to the audience.
It was a typically young teenagers that they would have a long stick, and they could go around to houses in the downtowns during the Industrial Revolution, before alarm clocks were readily available, and they would actually knock on the windows of people to wake them up because they began shift work. And so instead of a regular 9 to 5 kind of these factories began running night shifts and evening shifts, and people had to get up at different times. And so yeah, there's a picture of one. They're typically younger people. This is an older one here in the picture, but they were called knocker-uppers. And they would knock on the windows to wake you up, and they would get a few cents per day, and they would collect that monthly for waking people up to get to their shift work, because it was long before the sun came up, and that then restricting our work to just the daylight hours kind of went out the window, and we began a 24-hour schedule at factories. And so these young guys were called knocker-uppers.
Are you impressed,
which
Bill,
has a different connotation today, but probably.
Yeah, I'm glad you gave the definition. But I do know that, like, Ben Franklin's the first one that started city lighting, city lamps along the street. And so there were people that would go along every day and get on a little ladder and light the lamps. And sometimes they have a long pole lighted, and then they'd come around in the morning and put them out. And so, well, that's fascinating.
It is.
Well, if I could help you in your journey, just a little bit, I feel like I served a purpose.
That's a pretty big contribution.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
And thank you for the definition of knocker-upper. I appreciate that. Now, during this time, you had a genre of literature which were rags to riches stories, and they inspired Americans. And so it was hard work, honesty, strength through adversity, and they could achieve success. A writer named Horatio Alger, and he began writing in 1867. And one book was called Strong and Steady, or Paddle Your Canoe. Another one was Ragged Dick. Another was Shifting Himself, or Gilbert Grayson's Fortune. And these were immigrants who went from homeless street boys to learning how to work hard, learning how to be honest, and then they would become successful. But this was the mentality of America. This was the great opportunity. Worldwide, the most common form of government was kings. And whether it's a Chinese emperor or Indian Maharaja or Muslim sultan or the kings of Spain, France, and Austria, the whole world was this hierarchical pyramid with the elites on the top and the common people on the bottom. And in America, through individual capitalism, you had the highest and the fastest rise in individual freedom and opportunity in the world. Right? So instead of kissing up to the king or kissing up to the government, hoping to get a handout or some, royal company type of, agreement from those in power. Anybody could work hard. And so this individual capitalism resulted in the highest and fastest rise in the standard of living, really in human history. Wow. And you had in 1894, Orison Swett Marden wrote Pushing to the Front. And in 1896, he founded the Success magazine, and it published inspirational stories of success in life through common sense principles and well-rounded virtues. And none of it was being helped by the government. There was no government handouts. There was no come across to America and you can sign up for instant welfare. Right? Every immigrant was a net plus. They drew nothing from the government, and they added their hard work and their ingenuity. And most of them were from Judeo-Christian countries, and they added to the faith. And but then you began to have Marxism. And so Karl Marx started his Marxist ideology, and it was trying to upset the structure of society in Europe with the elites on top and the common people on the bottom. And the haves and the have-nots. And he called it critical theory, where you would organize the proletariat, the working class, against the bourgeois, which is the business owner class, the upper class. But you had immigrants coming to America, lots of them, and a lot of them had the Protestant work ethic, but some of them were infected with this Marxism idea. Now in America, we didn't have an elite class. Anybody that was elite had gotten there relatively recently because they had worked hard. And so they eventually changed this Marxist critical theory to a racist ideology or ethnic or religious, where they would try to find these differences. The way it works is you break society into groups and pit the groups against each other to destabilize and cause violence. And when everybody's in fear, they'll panic and surrender their freedoms to a new ruling class. And so they, had a little difficulty trying to institute this in America. Now, Eugene Debs was one of the key people that enters the picture at this time. And so Chicago has a factory making railroad cars called the Pullman Railroad Car Factory. And they had the workers, and they built little houses for the workers to work in. And they built little shops for the workers to shop in. And then they had the factory where the worker worked in. It's a little utopian type of setup. And then the price of railroad cars fell. There was a downturn in the economy. And they didn't need as many railroad cars. And the workers were being laid off. And there was a very disgruntled group. And so Eugene Debs, somebody that had adopted this German Marxist socialism mentality, he organized the strikes. You had one strike in 1886 near the McCormick Harvesting Machine Company that made tractors in 1886, and the flyer was actually printed in German. Right?
Really?
Because they knew these German immigrants were coming over, and so it turned into what's called the Haymarket Riot. And somebody threw a peaceful protester, like an Antifa BLM type, threw a dynamite pipe bomb at the police, and it killed a bunch of them. And they they built a statue in honor of the policeman, but the Weather Underground destroyed it in like 1969 or whatever. And then they rebuilt this, and then the Weather Underground and Bill Ayers, who helped introduce Obama to politics, and Eric Mann, that helped introduce Patrice Cullors and the founders of the BLM to politics. They had the riots in Haymarket Square, blowing up this statue to these policemen way back in 1886 that died in this original Haymarket riot. And so these socialists.
It's funny how that thread just really waves itself right through there. And, Cullors and others, openly brag about being trained Marxists. And, they have deep roots to the 1800s.
And so these the Marxists wanted to pick May 1st as the International Workers' Day, to be in, workers of the world unite. Let's overthrow the ruling class and let's set up ourselves as running it. It sounds sort of nice until you realize that you set up, socialism is everybody owns everything in common, but somebody has to be in the government handing out the common stuff.
Yep.
And they're always going to be tempted to want to funnel a little extra to their family and friends on the side, and hold back from someone they just don't like. And before you know it, it gets discretionary. And the saying is, he who holds the purse strings has the power.
Yeah.
And so every attempt at everybody owning everything equally always ends up with a deep state bureaucracy passing out favors to themselves and weaponizing the government to punish their political enemies, ruled by the most corrupt guy at the top, a dictator. Right?
Yep.
Anyway, but so it sounds really nice, but it always ends up with what I just explained. Now,
but what's interesting, I can't help but notice, is the articles, of, say, Harper's Weekly, some of the, it seemed like there was a fair depiction of the times. I don't know that in the future, people will look at the times we live in and be able to tell the truth of it based on the headlines of Time Magazine, Newsweek, so forth. It's interesting there. It seemed to be a little more accurate of the situation when you look at the cover of like Harper's Weekly on the screen right now of a king sitting on top of the factory.
Yeah. So the tactic you're talking about, George Orwell called doublespeak. And that's where you call something the exact opposite. So in the 1984 dystopian novel, he said the ministry of truth in the government, but all it did was lie.
Right.
And so this has turned into the naming of bills. So the Sanctity of Marriage or Respect for Marriage Act destroys marriage, right?
Yes.
Because it's anything fluid sex that goes on. The Affordable Care Act bill makes it unaffordable. It's like the infrastructure bill passes, and what happens? Our infrastructure is being destroyed while the government sits back and lets factory after factory sort of mysteriously get destroyed and so forth. And so this tactic is where you blame your opponent of what you're guilty of. And it's called psychological projection. So some candidates colluding with Russia, giving away a fifth of our U.S. uranium in exchange for contributions to her foundation. She wants to pay for a Steele dossier to accuse her opponent of colluding with Russia.
Yep.
Right? Another candidate's extorting Ukraine, saying, stop investigating my son or I'll hold back billions. They want to accuse their opponent of extorting Ukraine. Right? So this tactic is being used every day where they accuse you of being racist and bigoted when they're the racist and bigoted. They accuse you of an insurrection when they did the insurrection. They accuse you of wanting a coup when they did the coup. So it's anyway. So back to this strike.
Really good.
It's 1894. George Pullman, Pullman Railroad Car Company, Chicago, and there's a downturn, and Eugene Debs organizes a riot, and he has them basically destroy $80 million worth of railroad cars spreading to 27 states.
Wow.
And it paralyzes the entire country. Could you imagine groups organizing, rioting, and burning in city after city all around America?
That would never happen.
Right? No, that couldn't happen.
Autonomous zones and tearing down statues. And so this Debs Rebellion is what it was called, interrupted the mail, because the mail was on the trains. It interrupted all commerce because everything is shipped on railroads, and the country's paralyzed. And so Grover Cleveland is the president. You know him because he is the one who dedicated the Statue of Liberty welcoming all the immigrants to America, right? And so Grover Cleveland in 1894 has to do what? Send out 12,000 federal troops, army troops, to break the strike, to try to get the country going again because of what Eugene Debs did. So Eugene Debs is put in prison. He reads and rereads Karl Marx's Das Kapital while he's in there. And Grover Cleveland wants to appease all these workers that just got all upset because of the rioting and the downturn in the economy. And so he wants to go ahead and give them a day off work. But he does not want it to be May 1st, International Workers' Day, where they could every year say, we're in cahoots with the globalist one world government of overthrowing the elite class so we can have our workers' paradise that's going to be end up ruling by an elite class. So he chose September 1st, or the first Monday in September. And so that's where our Labor Day started. Eugene Debs was put in prison. He actually runs for president 5 times from 1900 to 1920. One time he ran from prison, started several socialist parties in America, and then branching off in 1920 is the Communist Party USA. And they run candidates for president every year until 1940. And that's when Franklin Roosevelt decided to make a treaty with Stalin during World War II. And the Communist Party USA said, why should we run our own candidates when here you have a Democrat making treaties with Stalin? So let's just support Democrat candidates. And that's when you had people like Ronald Reagan saying, I didn't leave the Democrat Party, the party left me, right? It was infiltrated. Anyway, so these socialists, they came to America and they wanted to redistribute wealth. Now you had the wealthy people in America that basically got there on their own. In one lifetime, they could go from having nothing and working in their garage and making an invention and then being able to mass produce it and becoming wealthy. So we didn't have this 1,000-year ruling class like the Europeans did. But nevertheless, this movement came to take money from the rich. And so first you had a corporate income tax being pushed through in 1894, a 1% tax on the corporate stock, but it was only the extreme wealthy that owned corporate stock. So you're just taxing these extreme wealthy to redistribute. And then you had the personal income tax pushed through with Woodrow Wilson, and it was a 1% tax on the top 1% richest people. Then you had the inheritance tax because it was only the extreme wealthy that had an inheritance that was worth leaving. And but it was just to tax these Bill Gates, George Soros, Warren Buffett, Zuckerbergs, all these people. But they didn't get taxed. They're too smart for that. They hire armies of accountants. They'll move their assets. And so that's when you began to see tax-free foundations being formed. Carnegie Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation. This way, they still controlled 100% of their money. They just weren't taxed on it because they're smart enough to be able to get around that. And so any effort to tax the rich really just taxes the moderate rich, which are these people climbing up by their own hard work. And so Eugene Debs, his followers rioted, and they got an attorney named Clarence Darrow. And you know Clarence Darrow because he defended the Scopes monkey trial pushing evolution. Eugene Debs was friends with Roger Baldwin, who started the ACLU. The ACLU was originally formed to defend people who were communists. Roger Baldwin, the founder of the ACLU, was a World War I draft dodger. And he said, I am for socialism. I seek social ownership of property, the abolition of the property class, the sole control of those who produce wealth. Communism is the goal. And so this Eugene Debs, Roger Baldwin, ACLU. Eugene Debs was charged with 10 counts of sedition and sentenced to 10 years in prison. And anyway, you had these anarchists and socialists that would have their marches on May Day to free Eugene Debs. And so they had the May Day riots of 1919. So they like to have riots in the streets. And then you had Woodrow Wilson denied Debs's pardon. And Woodrow Wilson said, well, the flower of American youth were pouring out its blood to vindicate the cause of civilization over there in Europe. This man, Debs, stood behind the lines, sniping, attacking, and denouncing them. This man was a traitor to his country. He will never be pardoned during my administration. And so that was Woodrow Wilson talking about Eugene Debs, this rioter that started the Socialist Party in America. Warren G. Harding did not pardon Debs. The White House released a statement. There is no question of his guilt. He is a dangerous man, calculated to mislead the unthinking and affording excuse for those with criminal intent. Now, Eugene Debs had his picture, by the way, was on the wall of Bernie Sanders' office.
Interesting.
And Burlington, Vermont. And then Sanders had a plaque to Eugene Debs in his congressional office. And now during this time, you have Vladimir Putin, and he's doing the communist revolution in 1919 in Russia, throwing off the monarch, the czar, and his ruling class. And
you got Stalin.
Yeah. And so then you had Roosevelt aligning with Stalin. And so then you had, like I mentioned, the Days of Rage, where the Bill Ayers and Eric Mann, the Weather Underground, destroy the Haymarket Square riot, and with their Weather Underground. And Bill Ayers said, I am a radical leftist, small c communist. Maybe I'm the last communist who is willing to admit it. The ethics of communism still appeal to me. I don't like Lenin as much as Marx. And then the Weatherman Underground, Eric Mann, trained Patrisse Cullors, founded Black Lives Matter. And she said, we're trained Marxists. So it's interesting how these threads go through history. Now, in America, the laborers, they worked hard for wages, and they could buy trucks and houses, cars and boats and guns and other things. And they had lots of personal possessions. Now, if you own stuff, you can give away stuff. The Bible called that charity. And Karl Marx says communism can be summed up in one sentence: abolition of private property. So if you finally reach this goal of communism, right? Lenin said socialism is a transition phase to communism. And so whether it's democratic socialism or not, you're just involved, you're voting in a transition phase. And that Lenin said the goal of socialism is communism. Karl Marx says communism can be summed up in one sentence: abolition of private property. So if you no longer own a boat or a car or a truck or a house or a gun, right? And if you don't own stuff, you can't give away stuff. And so you can no longer be charitable. And the Bible talks all about charity.
Yep.
Well, but Bill, we're being promised right now that's the goal, is that you will own nothing. But somehow or another, you'll be happy about it.
That's what they're saying.
That's the promise right now from the World Economic Forum all the way through, which obviously Joe Biden's the hardest working member in the history of Klaus Schwab's World Economic Forum. They've placed leaders of most Western developed countries, from Trudeau and his entire cabinet to Germany to New Zealand to France to wherever else. The World Economic Forum has a specific goal that you will own nothing
and be happy.
But how do you think they can make that happen? Because if I owned nothing, I'd be mad about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking with someone at a meeting recently, and he was at Davos back, 15 years ago there, and they had all these World Economic Forum people there, and they had a panel of faith leaders, and one of them was a very popular pastor that wrote a million-selling book, but he was on a panel with a Muslim imam and a Catholic cardinal and all these different faith leaders. And he says, you have two legs of the stool. You globalist business people have the business world, and with your money, you're infiltrating the political world. But you're not going to be able to institute your one world agenda without us. And he pointed to the panel. We're the faith world. And so so they began to give hundreds of millions of dollars to create woke churches and woke seminaries, and not just in Christian and Catholic, but they infiltrated the Mormons and the Muslims and all these different groups. And they're basically pushing their woke agenda worldwide. And they want to either get the church to be apathetic and not get involved, or be woke and want to push their agenda. And so, but it's a deliberate promotion of this. Now, just to show you a little contrast, you had Booker T. Washington. He was a slave. He walked 500 miles to the Hampton Institute, which was founded by a Republican Union general. There was all these freedmen's colleges that were started by Republican Union generals after the Civil War. And Booker T. Washington graduates and ends up becoming president of Tuskegee Institute. He forms the National Negro Business League 10 years before the U.S. Chamber of Commerce was started. And Booker T. Washington was the first black man to have dinner in the White House with Republican President Teddy Roosevelt. Booker T. Washington said, anyone can seek a job, but it requires a person of rare ability to create a job. What we should do in our schools is turn out fewer job seekers and more job creators.
Wow.
So good.
That's the best quote of the day right there.
It is. That's excellent.
And so Labor Day, you have the people that are just working their jobs, and the communist idea is everybody will own everything in common. And again, it sounds nice. It's sort of like John Lennon's 1971 song that he wrote with his second wife, Yoko Ono. And it's Imagine. And it says, imagine no possessions and no religion too. It's like, oh, what a wonderful world. No possessions, no religion. It's like, okay, there's no God. So there's no absolute right and absolute wrong. And all you got is human lust, because you can't change human nature. And no possessions. Well, it sounds nice, but the saying is, he who holds the purse strings has the power. So everything's owned in common, but somebody's got to be in the position handing out all this common stuff. And they're human. And they're always going to be tempted to want to funnel a little extra to their family and friends on the side and weaponize this system to go against anybody they don't like. And before you know it, you're back to a dictatorship. So it's like,
yeah, that's interesting. 71 was an interesting year because that's the same year that Klaus Schwab started the World Economic Forum. That's the same year that we got off the gold standard. That's the same year that they made that snake building for the Catholic.
The Pope's chapel, that the inside of it looks like a serpent.
A serpent, you know,
the architect, they
and
unveiled
now
that
the
in
song
71.
71, imagine. That is pretty fascinating. That was a big year.
These threads can be traced back. We're just experiencing people finally waking up to it.
Yeah, there's the chapel.
The chapel.
The Pope's
71.
You know, so when Marxism was originally taking off, you had the French Revolution, and they killed off all the ruling class, and they wanted to set up this perfect society, liberty, equality, fraternity. Sounds nice, but it doesn't work. Liberty is experienced individually. Fraternity was their word for socialism. The fraternity, the club, the group, the collective, the mob, the state. And equality can be understood two ways. In America, it was equal treatment before the law. In France, it was everyone having an equal amount of stuff. And if the fraternity, the group, the collective, thinks you have too much stuff, it can use the power of the collective, crush your individual liberty, confiscate all of your personal stuff, redistribute it, and kill you. And so the French Revolution that killed 300,000 in the Vendée and chopped off 30,000 heads in Paris, that became the model for every socialist revolution since. You violently kill off the old order to do something new and wonderful. Now, in France's case, it lasted for about 10 years until it got taken over by a dictator named Napoleon. And so again, every attempt at doing things like that, it always ends up with a dictator. But you begin to have a split within the communist circles. You had those that wanted it now and those that were willing to wait till later. So the now versus later. The now people wanted to do this violent overthrowing, but the later one started with someone named Antonio Gramsci. And he talked about infiltrating and rotting Western institutions from the inside. Okay. The violent ones didn't like him, so they put him in prison, and he dies in an Italian prison. While he's in there, he writes his prison notebooks, and Antonio Gramsci wrote this: any country grounded in Judeo-Christian values can't be overthrown until those roots are cut. Socialism is precisely the religion which must overwhelm Christianity. In the New World Order, socialism will triumph by first capturing the culture via infiltration of schools, universities, churches, and media, transforming the consciousness of society. In other words, you can't conquer these Western countries from without because of this idea of the individual. Western civilization can be summed up in one word: individual. You have a worth as an individual. Because you're made in the image of God. You have rights as an individual. All other systems are group-based. They're called honor-shame cultures. The group honors you, your worth goes up. The group, like in Islam, the Ummah, if you're shamed in front of the group, your worth goes down. They'll even murder their own daughter if she embarrasses them in front of their group, right? And so he says, you've got to get rid of this idea of the individual. And you got to get rid of these Judeo-Christian values. And then you can bring people into identifying with their worth with a group. And so this idea is you rot the West from the inside, right? You try to push down a tree, it's like really hard. But if it's a rotten tree, you can push it over real easy. So the idea is take time, infiltrate the media, the Hollywood, the universities, churches, and you push this woke agenda and rot it from the inside.
That's why everywhere you turn, you see like our new press secretary, like she spends her first session explaining all of the intersectionality boxes that she checks, not her qualifications to be the press secretary. It's that she's female, African-American, lesbian, the first one, like she broke through this glass ceiling of intersectionality of the groups that she connects with. Her value came from connecting with these groups, not based on her skill set as an individual and what she brought to the job. And you kind of see that sort of intersectionality validation leading competency in many positions across the board.
Yeah, you're hitting it right on the head. And now Karl Marx and Frederick Engels wrote, "Conspirators by no means confine themselves to organizing the revolutionary proletariat, the working class. Their business consists in spurring it into artificial crises. For them, the only condition required for the evolution is a sufficient organization of their own conspiracy. They are alchemists of the revolution." So he's talking about you infiltrate and then you create crises. And when the crises are really bad, then everyone panics and gives up their freedom to the state. So that's the backdoor approach. So the front door approach is you come in with tanks. The backdoor approach is you destabilize the economy until everybody throws themselves at the feet of the government in exchange for a handout. Sort of like in Egypt. You need grain. The government says, here's some grain, but we're going to take your land, your cattle, your children, your houses, and so forth. And there's a great quote from Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged. She says, "There's no difference between communism and socialism except in the means of achieving the same ultimate end. Communism proposes to enslave men by force, socialism by vote. It's merely the difference between murder and suicide."
Man, that's true.
She's brilliant.
So, how much time do we have left? I don't want to.
We about 8 minutes or so there, and I've got about 8 hours of questions. So however we can fit this in.
So there's always a good and a bad. So the working class were organized into unions, and they did do things like give us an 8-hour workday, a 40-hour work week, minimum wage came from them, safer work conditions, more benefits for the employees. And but this made doing business more expensive. And so this motivated the business owners to look for alternatives. So you had Henry Ford, and he did not like these unions. And he was at a port, and he saw a Yemeni sailor who was working really hard. And he invited this Yemeni sailor to work in his Detroit factory, and he promised to pay him $5 a day. And so this Yemeni sailor spread the word throughout Yemen, throughout the Middle East, and it began this mass migration of Arab Muslims to Detroit to work in the factories. Why? To break the unions. And there's even an ArabAmerica.com website, and it says, the origin of the story of how the Yemeni community in Michigan is an interesting one. Way back in the early 1900s, Henry Ford started recruiting Yemeni workers to work at the Ford factories. After a few years, Ford sent more workers, and the Yemeni American community began to grow, and so forth. But it was all to do what? To break the unions. And then you began outsourcing. What's that? That's when these business owners realized they could build their factories overseas and then lobby to lower the tariffs so they could bring their stuff back into America cheaper and then get a bigger profit. And so business is basically water seeks its own level. And if they can make more money by moving their factory overseas, and so they do that. And so overseas, after World War II, we rebuilt Germany and Japan. So Americans are building factories in other countries, and they're seeing these people work hard and like, hey. And so if you have your factory in America, you have higher wages. Over in these other countries, you have lower wages. America, you have higher taxes. Over there, lower taxes. Over America, you get expensive lawsuits. Over there, none. In America, burdensome regulations. Over there, none. Over here, you got climate change and environmental restrictions. Over in China and India, you don't have any restrictions. And over here, you got crony capitalism. You got to kiss up to the people that are in office to keep your business going. Over there, you don't. And so you squeeze the sponge, the water goes out. So you implement all these Democrat agendas, and then all the business moves overseas. And then what happens? You lose patriotism. Because now these businesses are no longer on American soil. They're no longer loyal to America. They're loyal to the bottom line. And you create these things called globalists. And so the labor movement in America, yes, it did raise the standard of living for the working class, but it also caused outsourcing, which eliminated jobs for the working class. And actually, when you use the word working class, that's a Marxist term. America's founders prior to Marx didn't use that term. Everybody's an individual. You as an individual can work hard. You can move up the ladder. The idea that you belong to a group, a class, that's the Marxist idea. And they want to break you into classes so they can pit you against another class. That's the divide and conquer. The word devil in Greek is diabolos, which means to divide.
Man, are we seeing
And
that
so-
or what?
And if you've heard Biden's speeches in the last few days, I'm telling you, it is division, and angry, raging
Yep.
man that simply, I mean, whether no matter what, President Trump, whether you think you have an election, President Trump received more votes than any incumbent president in U.S. history. And so to call his voters, the MAGA movement, the greatest threat to democracy, I can't imagine something more divisive. I can't imagine anything more divisive than his last few days.
And so in heaven, Lucifer sowed division. And then he goes into the garden, sows division, gets Adam to blame Eve and Cain to kill Abel. And then he sows division. Gideon just defeated 100,000 Midianites, and it's peaceful. But then he has a son named Abimelech who goes to the town of Shechem, and he begins to do race politics, critical race theory. He says, is it better for you, the sons of Gideon, reign over you? Remember also that I am your flesh and your bone. And so they said, we got to vote for Abimelech. He's our brother. And so they go to the temple of Baal-Berith, and they take 70 pieces of silver, where he hires vain and worthless persons, Antifa, BLM type, to commit rioting and kill all his brothers. And then the men of Shechem made Abimelech king. And so you got a nation completely at peace. And then you got somebody inside that wants power, and each sows division. Man. And so Proverbs 6 says 6 things the Lord hates, and the last is he that soweth discord. And the answer is Psalms 133, how good and pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. Anyway, so we began to see that in recapping, most of America were agrarian and entrepreneurs and independent. Then you have this James Watt pumping water out of a coal mine and starts the Industrial Revolution. And then you have jobs with these immigrants. And then you have Marxists coming over, organizing them into class, the working class versus the business owners, and then does these riotings and paralyzes the country. And then you get Grover Cleveland to institute the first Labor Day, but doesn't want it on May 1st. The labor movement does increase the working conditions, but what happens is it causes outsourcing. And with outsourcing, you not only lose jobs, but you create globalists that want a one world government. And but back to the work ethic, there's a difference between local capitalism and global capitalism. Local capitalism is you and another person can decide that you want to do some job, produce a product, and trade it to him for money. And it's just you and the other person making the decision. You do the work or create the item, and he gives you the money. And it's just the two of you. And you can improve your place in life, and he likes the product that he got. And so it's a happy, win-win situation. But when you get bigger and bigger, you got people saying, well, hey, I want to get a monopoly, not just nationally, but globally. And so you get these globalist capitalists, and they are the Bezos and Zuckerbergs and Klaus Schwab's and George Soros's. And guess what? They love communists. Yeah. They love working with communist country, cheap labor. And so the difference is a local capitalism that produces patriotic citizens who are thankful for the atmosphere where they have upward mobility, versus the globalist capitalists who love the Hollywood elites praising them, and they seize the moral high ground by claiming they care about world peace, but in actuality they just want a world monopoly. And so when people try to say, well, it's capitalism versus communism, no, it's local patriotic capitalism versus globalist capitalism with the communists. They actually call it a shareholder capitalism, which basically is fascism. So it's sort of interesting. They want to call, conservatives fascists when they're the ones that are fascists, right?
Yep.
The government wants to control all the means of production and everything and consumption. So that's that projection where they blame you for what they're guilty of. But there's a lot more there, but I think I'm probably out of time.
Well,
So
if you want a copy of an article that Bill's written on this, you can just send us a text at 40509. Text the word Bill, BILL, 40509, the word Bill, and you'll get an automatic Dropbox link to be able to look at this article, which is a piece of a bigger book called The American Minute. You go to AmericanMinute.com to follow his work and other things that he's doing. Let me ask you the final question. Today's Labor Day. How do people walk out of this feeling like, hey, what are we celebrating? Can we redirect this? It's kind of like the rainbow has been hijacked in a weird way. It was meant for Noah. Is there a way that we can, hey, let's feel great about this day, the good things about our work and what we're doing? Give us the last word on Labor Day specifically, with a positive direction.
Yeah, thank you. And by the way, this is the book, Socialism, the Real History from Plato to the Present, that I had mentioned. God wants to bless you so that you can be a blessing. He blessed Abraham so Abraham could be a blessing. When the children of Israel went into the promised land, every family was given land. If you own land, you can accumulate stuff. The Bible called that being blessed. And then you can give away some of your stuff. The Bible called that charity. And so the hand of the diligent shall bear rule, one of the scriptures. And so Jesus gave the parable of the one guy given 5 talents, multiplied it to 10, another one 4, multiplied it or 2 to 4, and the other one buried the talent. And he was called the wicked servant because he buried it. And so God gives you stuff and you work hard with it and you become blessed. Why? So that you can be a blessing. And there's a great quote from Ronald Reagan where he talks about how in America we wanted to have this atmosphere where you could have this upward mobility. So in 1988, Reagan said, I believe God did give mankind unlimited gifts to invent, produce, and create. So money's a magnifier, whatever's in your heart.
Yep.
If you have a godly heart, you're going to use the money for good. If you have a evil heart, you're going to use the money for pornography and all kinds of evil things. All it does is magnify. So if you take it away from good people, who's left? It's going to be in the hands of the bad people, and they're going to do a lot more bad with it. So the idea is that on a local patriotic level, we want to encourage individuals working hard, being blessed, so that they can be a blessing to others.
Amen.
I love it. Again, you can go to AmericanMinute.com. Incredible books there. Obviously, there's the Socialism, the Real History from Plato to the Present. That's an incredible book. The other one that I was really interested in is right there, that American Minute as well, where you go through like all of the holidays, one day at a time through a year, what that looks like. I love that. So you can go to AmericanMinute.com and find the book American
And we'll have the
Minute.
links all down below. We'll feature this in our newsletter. If you go to flyoverconservatives.com, we have a newsletter that comes out each and every Friday. We will feature these materials in the next upcoming newsletter. It's full of tips and things to help encourage you, keep you informed, and it's too much stuff coming out there. We're putting out 30 shows a week right now. Too many things to keep track of, so the highlights are always in the newsletter. Go to flyoverconservatives.com, and we'll make sure that you can find Bill's work, that it's easy to find. We're going to put it all over the place. You can also text 40509, the word Bill, to get the Labor Day cutout from today's talk.
Bill, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. This has really been a blast.
All right, let's get our stuff together here. Hi, I'm David Whited. if we could skip the hi, my name's David part, because that's where I kind of tend to derail. Hi. But I did good. See, look. First thing it says. Say your name. Say your name, David White. Have you been wondering what to do with the spare time you have on Saturday mornings? Have I got a way for you to fill that time? Not cleaning your garage, folding your laundry, or doing something with yourself. Filling your head with worthless information about what may or may not have happened 5,000 years ago. Have you ever wondered about ancient civilizations or about chemtrails in the sky? Or have you ever had a friend at school talk to you about friend at school? Some days when you're sitting there with your lunch pail, you're talking to your friends at school, they bring up your flat earth, and you think it's a flat earth. I don't know if your flat earth is flat or not. I don't know, alligators are angry because they got all those teeth and no toothbrush. And it's all true. And we talk about it every Saturday. We talk about Rubik's Cubes and stuff. We like to have conversations with people that have made documentaries, written books. Oh, this is terrible. I can feel myself hating watching this later. Okay, give me a swoosh. Let's do this thing for real this time. Have I got a show for you? Hang on, my eyes red now? You won't be able to tell in there. Peter can fix it. He can run it through a filter. Can he run it through the Brad Pitt filter and get rid of my red eyes? Oh, I'm probably doing the world a disservice.
Most architects and engineers know nothing about the third worst structural failure in modern history. This does not happen by office fires.
The collapse of World Trade Center 7 was primarily due to fire.
Not one of them has ever collapsed, not even these after 9/11. What buildings have come down like this? Controlled demolition.
We did not find any evidence that explosives were used.
You heard explosions.
Big explosion.
Just seen a big flash.
Like a boom. We have more information of bombs, like an explosion.
Office fires don't melt steel. So what's going on here? Is there enough to warrant an investigation?
Hello, Flyover family. Join me every Wednesday for the Prophetic Report at 11:11 Central. You can find it on Rumble. You can find it on the Flyover app. We have such an incredible time of hearing from all of these different prophetic voices like Robin Bullock, Julie Green, Barry Wunsch, Amanda Grace, and Hank Kuhneman. Every week, it's either 5 or 6 different prophets that are speaking, and what's interesting is God is speaking through them, and all of these voices come together like puzzle pieces. It is so exciting to hear what the Lord is saying. We're hearing from medical, we're hearing from military intelligence, we're hearing from the financial world, we're hearing from mainstream media, but the most important is, what is God saying? He has not fallen off the throne. He's not nervous. He's not chewing his nails. He is in control. He has plans to prosper us and not to harm us. What a great time to be alive, and I'm so excited for you to join me every Wednesday at 11:11.